What happens when a Hollywood legend walks onto a daytime set expecting polite conversation, and instead feels the air thicken with tension, questions sharpen like blades, and an entire studio lean forward, sensing something is about to crack? Before we dive in, pause for a second, subscribe to Stage View right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment if you're ready for stories that don't blink when the moment gets uncomfortable. The lights were already warm when Denzel Washington stepped onto the set. Not the blinding glare of a red carpet premiere, not the moody shadows of a film soundstage. This was something else. Flat, even deceptively calm. The kind of light that exposes everything. Every blink. Every breath. The applause rose automatically, the kind that's practiced yet sincere, and Denzel smiled, that familiar half-smile that had carried kings, soldiers, and flawed heroes across decades of cinema. He waved once, subtle, controlled. Inside, though, there was a quiet calculation. He'd done this before. Countless interviews. Countless couches. But something about this room felt tight. Sunny Hostin sat upright at the table, notes stacked neatly, pen aligned with military precision. Her expression was professional, alert, eyes bright with the confidence of someone who knows the power of a question. Around her, the other hosts exchanged small glances, micro-expressions that meant nothing to the casual viewer, but everything to people who lived on live television. This wasn't just another celebrity drop-in. You could feel it in the way the audience held its applause half a beat too long, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Denzel took his seat. The chair shifted slightly under him. He adjusted his jacket, rested his hands on his knees, and looked out at the crowd. Faces everywhere. Expectant. Curious. Some reverent. Some skeptical. He'd learned long ago that admiration could flip into interrogation in a heartbeat. The opening minutes were smooth. Movie clips rolled. Laughter came easily. A story about his early career drew warm chuckles. And for a moment the tension loosened, like a knot relaxing just enough to give the illusion it might disappear. Denzel spoke with that measured cadence, thoughtful, grounded, the voice of a man who had lived 1,000 lives but never rushed a sentence. He spoke about discipline, about faith, about the responsibility of influence. Heads nodded. Applause sprinkled in like punctuation. Then Sunny leaned forward. It wasn't abrupt. It was gradual, deliberate. A shift in posture that cameras caught instantly. Her tone stayed calm, but something underneath it hardened, like steel wrapped in silk. She referenced a quote, something Denzel had said in another interview, months earlier, maybe longer. Words about personal responsibility. About culture. About choices. Some people felt, Sunny said carefully, that what you said came across as dismissive of systemic issues. The audience stirred. A murmur. Denzel's smile didn't vanish, but it stilled. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, not in anger, but in focus. He'd heard this before. The reframing. The pull toward a narrative he hadn't chosen. I don't dismiss reality, he replied evenly. I speak from my experience. Sunny nodded, but she didn't back off. But with your platform, she continued, don't you think there's a responsibility to acknowledge? There it was. The pivot. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. One of the hosts shifted in her seat, sensing the direction. The audience quieted, instinctively, the way crowds do before a storm breaks. Denzel leaned back slightly, crossing his ankle over his knee. A classic posture, relaxed on the surface, guarded underneath. I've been responsible my whole life, he said. His voice was calm, but there was a new weight to it, a resonance that silenced the space between words. I've raised children. I've employed thousands of people. I've spoken to kids in prisons and schools. Responsibility isn't something I put on when the cameras are on. Sunny's eyebrows lifted. Not offended, challenged. No one's questioning your life, Denzel. But when you say, I know exactly what I said, he interrupted, still polite, still measured, but unmistakably firm. The interruption landed like a dropped glass. Not loud, but shocking in its clarity. A few gasps rippled through the audience. For the first time, Sunny paused. A half second, long enough for the cameras to catch it, long enough for viewers at home to sit up straighter. Denzel turned slightly toward her, not aggressive, but direct. The problem, he continued, is when people listen to respond instead of listening to understand. Silence. Thick. Electric. You could see it on Sunny's face, the calculation, the choice between pushing harder or pivoting. She chose to push. Understanding goes both ways, she said. And many feel that your words reinforce narratives that hurt, That's your interpretation, Denzel said, gently now, almost sadly. And you're entitled to it. But don't tell me what I meant. The audience reacted audibly this time. A low "oh," the sound people make when they know a line has been crossed and there's no going back. One of the hosts glanced toward the producer's table. Another tried to interject with a soft laugh, a joke that fell flat before it could land. Denzel wasn't done. I've been in rooms where decisions were made about people who never got a seat at the table, he said. I've lived through things no soundbite can capture. So when I speak carefully. But I won't be careful in a way that's dishonest. Sunny's voice sharpened. No one's asking you to be dishonest. We're asking you to be aware. He met her gaze fully now. No smile. No performance. Just presence. Awareness without action is performance, he said. And I don't perform my convictions. The words hung there, vibrating. You could feel the audience split, not in hostility, but in intensity. Some nodded. Some frowned. Phones buzzed in pockets as producers frantically messaged social teams. This was no longer a segment. It was a moment. Sunny exhaled, leaned back slightly, then forward again, refusing to yield. So you don't think public figures should be challenged? Denzel didn't hesitate. I think public figures should be challenged honestly, he replied. Not cornered into agreeing with a narrative that makes everyone else comfortable. That landed hard. The applause this time was scattered, uncertain, but growing. The kind that starts with a few brave claps and spreads despite itself. One host attempted to smooth things over, praising Denzel's career, pivoting toward the film again, but the energy had shifted permanently. The audience wasn't here for promo anymore. They were witnessing a standoff. Denzel glanced briefly toward the crowd, then back to the table. In his chest, a familiar feeling stirred, not anger, not fear, but resolve. He hadn't planned to make a stand today, but he also hadn't planned to shrink. Sunny adjusted her notes. Her voice softened, but the edge remained. I respect your success, she said. But words matter. They always have, Denzel replied. That's why I choose mine. Another beat of silence. Another collective breath held. The cameras rolled on, unblinking, as both of them sat there. Two powerful voices, neither willing to fully yield, both aware that whatever happened next would echo far beyond this studio. And as the host finally said, "We'll be right back," and the music swelled just a little too late, everyone in that room knew the real story had only just begun. The music faded, but the tension didn't. It lingered in the studio like smoke after a match is struck, invisible yet unmistakable. During the brief break, cameras shifted angles, stagehands moved with forced casualness, and whispers rippled through the audience rows. Some people leaned toward each other, eyes wide, mouths close to ears. Others sat frozen, afraid that even breathing too loudly might break whatever fragile lines still held the moment together. Denzel remained in his chair. He didn't reach for water. He didn't check the monitors. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, hands folded loosely in his lap. On the outside, he looked composed, almost serene. Inside, a storm of thoughts moved quietly but relentlessly. He knew this terrain. He'd been here before, not on this set, not with these exact words, but in rooms where intent was questioned, where nuance was flattened into headlines, where silence was expected and compliance rewarded. Across the table, Sunny Hostin adjusted her microphone. She glanced down at her notes, then back up, then down again. This wasn't how she'd envisioned the segment unfolding. She believed in hard questions, in accountability, in pushing guests beyond polished answers. But something about Denzel's calm refusal to bend had shifted the balance. This wasn't a defensive celebrity scrambling to protect an image. This was a man standing still, letting the questions crash against him without moving an inch. A producer's voice murmured through the host's earpieces. We're back in 5, 4, 3. The applause cue flashed, and the audience responded, louder now, charged with anticipation. They weren't clapping for politeness anymore. They were clapping because they wanted resolution. Or escalation. Maybe both. We're back with Denzel Washington, one of the hosts said brightly, her voice pitched higher than before, an audible attempt to lift the mood. And, this has been a very passionate conversation. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the crowd. Sunny picked up the thread again, carefully this time, but unmistakably. Denzel, I want to make sure we're being clear, she said. No one here is questioning your integrity. But when conversations about race, justice, and power come up, emotions are strong. People are listening. So am I, Denzel replied. His voice wasn't raised. That was the thing that unsettled everyone. He didn't need volume. His words traveled because they were anchored. The audience quieted again, drawn into that gravity. Sunny nodded slowly. "Then listen to this," she said, and quoted another line, another fragment pulled from a different interview, isolated from its original context. As she spoke it aloud, the words sounded harsher than they probably had in the moment they were first said. The studio seemed to recoil slightly, as if the sentence itself carried weight. Denzel closed his eyes briefly. Not in frustration. In patience. When he opened them, he looked directly at Sunny. "You're stacking moments without the full picture," he said. "That's not listening. That's building a case." The audience reacted again, louder this time. A woman in the front row shook her head, impressed. A man 2 rows back whispered, "Wow," under his breath. Sunny straightened. "Isn't that what interviews are?" she countered. "We ask questions. We challenge." "Challenge is fine," Denzel said. "But when the challenge assumes guilt, the conversation is already broken." One of the other hosts jumped in, her tone conciliatory. "Maybe what Sunny's trying to say is that people look up to you. They hang on your words. And that's why I won't let them be twisted," Denzel replied immediately. The speed of his response surprised even him. It came from a place deeper than strategy. He felt the heat now, not anger, but conviction warming his chest. Years of watching younger voices get drowned out by misinterpretation. Years of seeing good intentions weaponized against themselves. Sunny pressed her lips together, then released them. "Do you think," she asked, "that sometimes your emphasis on individual responsibility ignores the realities people face?" The question hung there, framed carefully enough to seem neutral, sharp enough to cut. Denzel leaned forward for the first time. The subtle shift sent a visible jolt through the audience. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, posture suddenly intimate, almost confessional. "No," he said quietly. "I think it honors them." That softness, unexpected, disarming, changed the temperature again. "I grew up knowing the realities," he continued. "I watched people with talent never get a chance. I watched systems fail them. But I also watched people give up because no one ever told them they still had power. I refused to take that away." Sunny listened now, really listened, even if she didn't agree. Her eyes stayed on him, searching. "But when you say that publicly," she said, "some hear blame." "That's not my intent," Denzel replied. "And intent matters. Just like impact matters. But they don't cancel each other out." The studio was silent except for the low hum of equipment. No one shifted. No one coughed. This was the kind of quiet that felt earned. Then Sunny spoke again, more personal this time. "I come from a place where words have consequences," she said. "Where narratives shape policy. That's why I push." Denzel nodded slowly. "And I respect that," he said. "Truly. But pushing doesn't mean pushing people into corners." There it was again, that line. Corners. The audience murmured. Social media teams backstage were already clipping quotes, fingers flying, senses tingling. This was viral territory now. One of the hosts glanced nervously at the clock. They were running long. Way long. But no one dared cut it short. Not yet. Sunny inhaled, then exhaled, visibly steadying herself. "Let me ask you this," she said. "Do you think conversations like this help?" Denzel considered the question. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the audience, at the faces leaning forward, at the people at home he imagined sitting on couches, phones in hand, ready to judge. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "They help when they're honest," he said. "They hurt when they're performative." A collective reaction swept the room. Some applause. Some sharp intakes of breath. One host's eyes widened. Sunny's chin lifted just a touch. "Are you saying this is performative?" she asked. Denzel met her gaze without flinching. "I'm saying moments become performances when the goal is a headline instead of understanding." That one landed like a hammer. The applause that followed was louder, less scattered, more confident. The audience had picked a side, not unanimously, but emotionally. You could feel it in the way they leaned toward Denzel, the way they watched Sunny now, waiting for her response. She didn't smile. She didn't bristle either. Instead, she folded her hands on the table. "That's a serious accusation," she said. "It's a serious moment," Denzel replied. Another host attempted again to lighten the mood. "Well," she said with a strained laugh, "this is certainly one of the most intense conversations we've had in a while." The audience laughed, but it was thin, nervous. Everyone knew the truth. The intensity wasn't going anywhere. Sunny turned slightly toward the other hosts, then back to Denzel. We're running out of time, she said. So I'll say this. I don't agree with everything you've said, but I appreciate you saying it here. Denzel inclined his head. That's all I ask, he said. That people speak honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. The segment wrapped soon after, applause rising again as the music swelled. Denzel stood, shook hands, offered polite smiles. On the surface, it looked like any other televised debate, spirited, respectful, concluded. But the moment he stepped off the set, the aftershocks began. Phones buzzed incessantly. Assistants whispered urgently. Producers exchanged looks that said, "We're going to be talking about this for a long time." And somewhere, beyond the studio walls, clips were already spreading, comments igniting, sides forming. The confrontation hadn't ended when the cameras cut. It had only changed shape, moving from that bright, exposed table into the endless echo chamber waiting outside. The hallway outside the studio felt colder than it should have. Denzel walked at an unhurried pace, but his awareness was sharp, tuned to every glance, every whisper that followed him like a shadow. Assistants moved quickly now, voices low, eyes darting to their phones. Someone murmured, "It's already trending." Another said, "Clips are everywhere." Denzel didn't ask where. He already knew. He paused near the exit, one hand resting briefly on the back of a chair, grounding himself. This wasn't unfamiliar territory, but it was still heavy. He'd spent his life choosing his moments carefully, knowing when to speak and when silence carried more power. Today, silence hadn't felt honest. And honesty, he knew, always came with a cost. Back on the set, Sunny Hostin remained seated even after the applause died down. The audience filtered out slowly, many of them still buzzing, replaying lines in their heads, mouthing phrases they knew would become quotes by nightfall. Sunny watched them go, her expression unreadable. A producer approached, leaning in close. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, then looked up. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. "But I don't regret the questions." The producer hesitated. People are reacting. Strongly. Sunny exhaled through her nose, a mix of resolve and fatigue. They always do. In the control room, monitors replayed the exchange on a loop. Editors marked timestamps, social media managers debated captions, legal glanced over transcripts. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a moment being carved into fragments, ready to be consumed, shared, and judged by millions who hadn't felt the weight of the room when the words were first spoken. Within minutes, the clips hit the internet. Denzel's calm interruption. His line about listening to understand. The word performative, isolated and amplified. Each clip traveled fast, stripped of pauses and context, set to captions that leaned one way or the other. Some called it brave. Others called it dismissive. All called it powerful. At a red light, Denzel sat in the back of his car, phone finally in his hand. His wife's name glowed on the screen. "You all right?" she asked when he answered. "I am," he said after a beat. It got intense. She smiled on the other end. He could hear it in her voice. It always does when you mean what you say. He looked out the window as the city slid by. "I didn't go there to fight," he said. "But I wasn't going to fold." "And you didn't," she replied. "That matters." He hung up and rested his head back against the seat, closing his eyes briefly. He thought about the young man he'd once been, sitting in rooms where his voice trembled when challenged. About the years it took to learn that firmness didn't require volume. That standing your ground didn't mean stepping on someone else's. Across town, Sunny sat in her office, scrolling through reactions. Some messages were supportive, thanking her for pressing the issue. Others were harsh, accusing her of ambush, of disrespect, of missing the point. She set the phone down, hands flat on the desk. Her colleague knocked lightly on the door. "You okay?" Sunny looked up. "I am," she said. "But this is bigger than the show now." The colleague nodded. "It always is when it's real." Sunny leaned back in her chair, replaying the moment when Denzel leaned forward, voice soft but unyielding. There was no mistaking it. He hadn't come to win. He'd come to be clear. And that clarity, whether people agreed with it or not, had disrupted the usual rhythm of televised debate. That evening, pundits weighed in. Some praised Denzel's composure, calling it a masterclass in dignity under pressure. Others criticized him for not fully engaging with the premise of Sunny's questions. Panels formed. Hashtags trended. Opinions hardened. On one network, a commentator declared, "This was a turning point." Denzel Washington refused to be boxed in. On another, a different voice countered, Powerful men pushing back on accountability isn't new. We just don't see it this calmly. The story evolved, mutating with every retelling. Denzel avoided the noise. He turned off notifications, spent the evening quietly, a script open on his lap but unread. His mind kept drifting back to the studio. The lights, the pause before his interruption. The moment he realized there was no version of this conversation where everyone would leave satisfied. He wasn't wrong. Sunny, meanwhile, prepared for the next day's show. She reviewed notes, anticipating follow-up discussions, knowing the audience would be watching her closely now. Every word would be measured against what had already happened. She didn't plan to apologize. She didn't plan to escalate either. What she planned was to stand by the importance of asking difficult questions, even when the answers pushed back just as hard. Late that night, a longer, unedited clip surfaced online, posted by someone in the audience. It showed the pauses, the breaths, the moments between words. Reactions shifted again. Some viewers softened. Others doubled down. The debate deepened. And in that unedited space, something became clear to those willing to see it. This hadn't been a shouting match. It had been two worldviews colliding in real time, neither villain, neither hero, both unwilling to pretend. By morning, the phrase, "I don't perform my convictions," had taken on a life of its own. It appeared on timelines, in think pieces, in quiet conversations between friends who saw themselves reflected in one side or the other. Denzel read one message from a young actor he'd mentored years ago. It was short. "Thank you for showing me I don't have to yell to be heard." He set the phone down and allowed himself a small, private smile. Whatever came next, more questions, more criticism, more noise, he knew this much: the moment had landed. And once something like that lands, it doesn't disappear. It waits. It echoes. And it forces everyone watching to decide where they stand. By the next morning, the moment had hardened into something permanent. Not just a clip. Not just a quote. A line in the cultural sand. The studio audience that had filed out the night before woke up to notifications exploding on their phones. People who had been there in person recognized the pauses, the tension, the way the air had changed when Denzel leaned forward. Online, millions who hadn't felt that silence tried to fill it with certainty. Opinions arrived fast and loud, stripped of hesitation. The View opened that day with a heavier tone than usual. The smiles were practiced. The table felt longer. Sunny sat composed, shoulders back, eyes steady, but there was no mistaking it. She knew she was walking into a storm she had helped create. "We had a powerful conversation yesterday." One of the hosts began carefully. Powerful. That word did a lot of work. Sunny spoke soon after, measured and calm. She didn't apologize. She didn't escalate. She acknowledged the intensity, emphasized the importance of dialogue, and stood by her belief that difficult conversations mattered. As she spoke, the audience listened more closely than usual, weighing every syllable, searching for cracks, for confirmations. Outside the studio, the reaction had already split clean down the middle. Supporters of Denzel called it a masterclass in restraint. Commentators praised his refusal to be cornered, the way he never raised his voice, never attacked, never flinched. "This is what confidence looks like," one viral post read. No shouting, no insults, just clarity. Others pushed back hard. They argued that calm didn't equal correctness, that power wrapped in politeness was still power. Long threads dissected his answers line by line, debating intent versus impact, responsibility versus reality. Some accused him of dodging. Others said he'd exposed the limits of performative outrage. And then there were the people in between, the quiet majority who didn't tweet but watched, replayed, and thought. The ones who saw themselves in the discomfort. The ones who felt something shift but weren't sure how to name it. Denzel stayed off camera. He didn't release a statement. He didn't jump on another show to clarify. He went about his life, knowing that anything he added now would be folded into the noise. That restraint, too, became part of the story. Paparazzi caught him later that week leaving a restaurant. Someone shouted a question about Sunny. He smiled politely and kept walking. That image, unbothered, unhurried, circulated almost as widely as the confrontation itself. Sunny, on the other hand, faced it head-on. Interviews followed. Podcasts. Panels. She spoke about journalistic responsibility, about why she believed public figures should be challenged, especially when their words carried weight. She acknowledged Denzel's composure, even praised it, but never retreated from her position. "I don't think disagreement is disrespect," she said in one interview. I think it's necessary. That clip went viral too. Soon, the conversation outgrew both of them. Universities debated the exchange in media ethics classes. Commentators compared it to other infamous talk show moments, noting how rare it was to see tension handled without shouting. Memes softened the edges, jokes flying alongside serious essays. Late-night hosts referenced it with knowing smirks. But something deeper lingered beneath the noise. People talked about tone, about power, about who gets labeled angry and who gets labeled firm, about how often conversations collapse not because of what's said, but because of what's assumed. Weeks later, an audience member from that day posted a long reflection. She wrote about sitting there, feeling her chest tighten as the exchange unfolded, about realizing she agreed with parts of both arguments, about wishing more conversations allowed that space instead of forcing allegiance. The post didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It was shared quietly, thoughtfully, the way meaningful things often are. Denzel read it late one night. He didn't like it. He didn't comment. He simply closed his phone and sat with it. Sunny saw it too. She bookmarked it. In the end, there was no winner declared. No apology tour. No triumphant follow-up. Just an unresolved echo. A reminder that some moments aren't meant to be wrapped neatly. And maybe that was the real power of it. Not the clash itself, but the way it refused to collapse into something simple. Because what happened on that set wasn't just a celebrity confrontation. It was a mirror. One that forced viewers to ask themselves uncomfortable questions. About listening. About intent. About whether standing firm always looks the same. The audience reaction hadn't ended when the cameras cut. It was still unfolding, in comment sections, in group chats, in quiet internal debates that didn't need an audience at all. And now it's your turn. Did Denzel draw a necessary line, or did Sunny ask the questions that needed to be asked? Was this a moment of clarity, or a missed opportunity for deeper understanding? Drop your take in the comments. Let the debate continue. And if you want more cinematic, intense, behind-the-moment stories like this, where the tension is real and the silence speaks just as loudly, make sure you subscribe to Stage View. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and stay tuned, because the next moment is always closer than it seems.